Richard Dawkins. Who is this man? Well, I presented him the other day, and if I can get this fellow up here, and this is more or less his bio, okay? In a nutshell, you know, he's a biologist, essentially. He studied at Oxford University, and is famous for having become an atheist and for peddling atheism, okay? And he won some prizes there. I see him more like what you see on the right there. I see him more as a caricature of science. And I have very little respect for people who claim to be scientists when they're not. And certainly Dawkins is not a scientist. And you say, well, why? Why is that, Bill? You have something against him? No, he doesn't follow the scientific method. And they harp on stuff that has nothing to do with science, which is on persuading, convincing people, converting them, recruiting them, and they pepper here and there a little bit of censorship to make sure that they keep their jobs. That's how it's working today. That's how it all ended up. Anyways, Dawkins says that he likes scientists because they define their terms and they use their terms, I guess, consistently, rationally, scientifically. I don't know. Let's find out. He says the following. He says, the scientists that I respect are scientists who work hard to be understood, to use language clearly, to use words correctly, and to understand what is going on. We have been subjected to a kind of word salad of scientific jargon used out of context, inappropriately, apparently uncomprehendingly. I don't know what he was talking. I think he was talking about quantum mechanics, mathematical physics in general. I mean, they use words like, you know, energy, time, fields, wave. None of these words are defined. We have no idea what they are, but they're used constantly in mathematical dissertations. So I don't know what he's really talking about. Hello. So what is he talking about? What does he mean that he respects scientists that have clear language? Here, the entire language of mathematical physics, which is an equivalent to science according to these people, all of it completely is nonsense. Not one word is defined. We have no definitions, and therefore, you know, I'm not sure what he's talking about, clear language. We don't have a clear language coming from the mathematical establishment. And so one of the words that he apparently fails to define is one that concerns him. He claims to be a biologist. Well, what is a biologist? Well, it's a guy who studies or does something with biology. So you look up the word biology in the, well, anywhere. This is from the Wikipedia, but you can look it up anywhere. You'll find the same thing. Biology is the natural science that studies life in living organisms. Great. So all we have to do is find out what life is. So you look up life, and it says life is a characteristic that distinguishes physical entities that have biological processes, like the fact that they use biology, biological. They use a synonym to define life. Okay, such as signaling and self-sustaining processes from those that do not, whatever those are, right? Either because such functions have ceased, they have died, or because they never had such functions and are classified as inanimate. And we don't know what the difference between inanimate and life is so far, but I like the next statement. It says, there is currently no consensus regarding the definition of life. You know, it says one popular definition is that organisms are open systems that maintain homeostasis, are composed of cells, have life, cycle, undergo metabolism, can grow, adapt to the environment, la 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 la. Other definitions sometimes include non-cellular life forms such as viruses and viroids. So, what did you learn at the university, my son? Did you learn what life is? No, they're still working on that definition. Okay. Yeah, we don't have a definition of life from these people, and they claim to be biologists, and biology is the study of life. So I don't think there are any biologists on planet Earth, at least so far. Until they can define the word life, we don't know what their subject matter is, what they study. In rational science, we have no problem. We had to define this term, so we do define what life is, what the word life means and is. We start with the word living or alive and say an object that moves against the path of least resistance. We're usually referring to gravity, but it also could include the wind or whatever, right? But primarily it's gravity. Anything that moves against gravity, that's living. Rocks don't move against gravity. And that's a long story because people start putting examples, and you got to answer each one of the examples and show, you know, if they really understood. One of them, for example, just quickly, fire. People say, well, fire goes up the building, so is fire alive? Well, fire is not an object. Fire is a process of combustion, and so you get things of that nature which you got to clarify, because people immediately think of things that they can see or touch, and that's not what an object is. Okay, an object is that which has shape. Fire is a process. Okay, and any process is a concept. So that's a long story. Anyways, life is the collection of living entities. So once you define living or alive, then you can define life. And yeah, anything that moves against gravity on its own, obviously, is alive. Okay. He's more famous, this fellow, Dawkins, he's more famous for being an atheist than for peddling his atheism. He wrote a couple books on the subject, and he does talk circuit. And what does he talk about? He talks about atheism more than he does about biology. So he's become like a poster boy for atheism. Okay? And so he wrote a book, 2006, called The God Delusion. And in it he expresses his ideas about atheism. He does two things. He attacks the religionists, in other words, especially the Christian religion, right, where we all in the West are raised, primarily the Christian religions. He attacks that, and then he puts the scientific versions to those same questions. And here's a little quick rundown, a little introduction on his book. Okay, essentially this is it in a nutshell. It says, through the ages, theorists and theologians have struggled to prove the existence of God. One fellow who tried, at least he mentions a couple there. One was St. Thomas Aquinas, and he proposed that there was a time when there was nothing. Okay? And so that's when they said, well, then God came in and he said, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be, and there will be an answer, let it be. I think that's what God said, or something along those lines. Maybe I'm confusing it with a song. Anyways, so Aquinas says, well, where did this God come from? Okay, and so he said, well, he was there. And so these people ask, well, okay, but you said he's there, but where did he come from? Okay. And so the question really is, you know, you cannot explain the origin of God. That's been essentially the argument of the atheists for countless years, okay, decades, centuries, okay. So what does Richard Dawkins propose in exchange? Well, he suggests the following. He says, if you look at the distant galaxy, you may be looking at the origin of the universe itself. The origin of the universe. Here you have an atheist that's saying this, okay? He's talking about the origin of matter, okay? You're looking at the very beginning of space and time, the Big Bang. Okay? Physics has discovered particles smaller by far even than the atom. And at laboratories like CERN, scientists studying the collisions of these particles are on the cusp of understanding how the universe got started in the first place. And so you see there, he introduces what they're doing at CERN, the fact that they're colliding particles, and they say, look, we have all this gibberish there, and it's all these lines, etc., and that's going to give us an idea how the universe got started. And all they have is these images of explosion, of collisions, you know, and they try to give you the idea that that explosion is exactly how the universe got started. The only problem is, remember, we started out with nothing. You know, the other guys started with God. What did these guys start with? What was it that collided? Well, they say it's not that something collided like in CERN, right? Okay, so, or the Large Hadron Collider. Then how did it happen? Well, they say energy split into positive and negative energy, so it was an explosion, not a collision. Okay, so that's how they explain it, and that's what he believes. Okay, here's an atheist speaking. Okay, he's saying, look, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in nonsense. I believe in the creation of matter from nothing, from a concept, from something or a nothing called energy. So it makes you stop and think about our good old friends, the atheists, right? Now, you know, you might say, well, Bill, you got something against atheists. What do you believe in? Or do you believe in God or something? No, as a lot of you know, I was an atheist for most of my life. I came from an atheist family, okay? So, in fact, we were militant atheists. And I got out of atheism, you know, later on in life, quite late, in fact. And, you know, you might say, well, so what? You went back to this, now you're a Christian or a Buddhist or what? A Muslim or a Hindu? What are you now, okay? Well, no, I'm what is called a scientist, okay? And what the problem is that atheism is unscientific. That's what it is. It's not the issue of whether there is a God out there with a magic wand doing his magic, or a devil or whatever. No. What it's all about is the word belief. That's what it's got to do with the word belief, not with God. Okay, so let's get that in the proper context. And here, let me did a little rundown here so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, let me get this thing in there. Put it over here. And yeah, what it is that atheism is unscientific. Why is it unscientific? It is unscientific because it emphasizes belief. Okay, and we're going to see that now with good old Dawkins here. Atheists talk about belief, lack of belief, non-belief. It's always belief, and they try to get around that with some word wizardry, and they say, well, we're not into belief, but yeah, you are. And they go into knowledge. They say, what experiment can you run to prove the existence of God? What evidence do you have? How can you prove? They use words like truth and fact. So they're into, and they think this is scientific. That's the problem. See, none of these words, these notions belong to science. That's where the problem starts. And what is mathematical physics in other so-called science? It's in the business of persuading, convincing, converting, and recruiting, just like religions are. They're trying to win your heart. That's what they do. Okay? Science is objective. Science is not subjective, and so we don't use belief, knowledge, experiments, evidence, anything that is geared towards convincing you, to persuading you to change your mind. That's not science, that's religion. So these people are religionists because that's their business. Their business is trying to convince you. Okay? We don't do that in science. Science, we explain something objectively so that you understand it. That's where science stops. You go to your house, the other guy goes to his house. Everybody thinks about it on their own. They reach their own conclusions in the privacy of their homes. And whatever conclusion they reach is irrelevant to science. All those conclusions belong to religion. It means that's your personal religion. That's all that we've accomplished. The scientific part stops where you say, this is the mechanism, I can show it to you on the screen or whatever, you know, and that's where science stops. Because now the person understood what you're proposing. That's it. He communicated. Okay, for that, yeah, you need language. So he was right, but he didn't use his own notion, the fact that scientists are people who define and who use their terms consistently. Mathematical physicists, do not define, and they do not use, under any circumstance, their words consistently. And they have only irrational definitions whenever they do have definitions. Okay? Okay, science is about explaining. Atheism is the religion of mathematical physics, of mathematical physicists. Okay? Atheism adheres to the prescription of the unscientific method of mathematical physics, and that includes observing, predicting, experimenting, verifying, proving, measuring, calculating, persuading. None of that has anything to do with physics. Okay? Anytime you introduce evidence, you're trying to persuade. You're trying to persuade the jury. That's why evidence is not part of the scientific method, and therefore neither is experiment. Experiment, you can use that for technology on the one hand, and you can use experiment to try to reach your own conclusions and say, well, let's see, I did this experiment, so this theory that I have in my head is not really very correct, because whatever experiment I ran debunks what I was proposing. For example, particles, that there are particles in the universe, right? Quantum mechanics, all experiments debunk quantum mechanics. And so what do? They say, well, no, but we have a new principle, the uncertainty principle. A particle can be at two places at once. So instead of taking that, like they like to talk about falsifiability, the experiments all falsify quantum mechanics, the physical interpretations. What did they do? They said, well, that was all classical mechanics. What we do now is quantum mechanics. What is quantum mechanics? Quantum mechanics means we're going to use surrealism, and we're going to use, we're going to bring into it some magic. And they say a particle can be at two places at once. You say, oh, what was that? And they say, well, that's known as quantum mechanics. Yeah, but that's a violation of my intuition, my common sense. They say, well, that was classical mechanics. See, quantum mechanics, we don't understand it. We can't imagine it, but that's what the particles do. Instead of saying, well then, this falsifies the particle hypothesis, we should get rid of the particles. No, they say, no, we're going to create all these principles, uncertainty and complementarity and all this nonsense that they created in quantum mechanics to justify the particles, because they don't want to get rid of the particle. That's the issue. If they get rid of the particle, they're dead. That means that all they've done in the last 100 years is nonsense and poppycock. And that's what these people are really spreading. What they're doing is spreading the particle hypothesis through all these so-called principles. Okay. So they ask Dawkins, okay, so what is wrong with believing in God? What is wrong with having this belief in God? Is there a problem with that? I mean, you want to believe in something, it's your problem, right? And Dawkins says the following. He says, what's wrong with believing in God? He says, I think it's false. Okay? It's a matter of belief without evidence. Evidence. Keyword evidence. Evidence, what is used for? It's used to convince people, to persuade them, right? And as a scientist and as an educator, I like the idea that we believe things because there's evidence. Well, neither belief or evidence has anything to do with science, but that's what he's been brainwashed to believe. That, you need evidence to convince people, and once you have the evidence, now you believe. Well, I don't care what you believe in. The guy across the street believes in something exactly the opposite of you. And so who's right? Who determines? Does God determine who's right on which side? Okay? There's such a lot of evidence available now at the beginning of the 21st century. It's a tragedy to base your life upon something for which there is no evidence. What does he talk about? Evidence, evidence, evidence. It's all about evidence for him. You got to prove through evidence. You got to convince people. So what does he do? He goes door to door, like Mormon, trying to sell Bibles. He sells quantum Bibles. He sells relativity Bibles, string theory Bibles, perhaps, or whatever stuff, maybe biological Bibles. He's selling Bibles on the basis of evidence. He wants evidence. He wants proof. He wants fact. And all those are opinions. And he never realized that. Those are opinions. Everybody has their own evidence. Some people have evidence for God, they claim. And you say, well, that's not evidence at all. And they say, well, to you. but for me it's evident. And so they have this, this thing where people have different evidences for their beliefs. And everybody has all these biases. That's why evidence has nothing to do with science. It's religion. It's opinion that, that deals with evidence. Okay, so he continues and he says, oh, got trouble getting these things up there today. He says, I think that it's a tragedy that people are being actively led astray by medieval, pre-medieval superstitions and Bronze Age myths written down more than 2,000 years ago. No, quantum only started 100 years ago, okay? I think he's got his time wrong. I mean, all this superstition, all these surrealistic explanations, they come from 100 years ago, not from pre-medieval days, okay? Religion probably gives a bit of consolation. The fact that something is consoling doesn't make it true. Yeah, again, we're talking about quantum mechanics, right? The fact that you think you've got an explanation and you have to create these weird explanations, physical interpretations, to get the theory across means that something is wrong. Instead of questioning the theory, especially the assumption, the particle hypothesis, they said, oh no, we can cover all that stuff up with all these principles that we have invented. That uncertainty that a particle can, or the ball, I prefer to do it with a ball, the ball stands still so it doesn't move. And when it moves, it doesn't stand still. The more you know about standing still, the less you know about moving. And the more you know about moving, the less you know about standing still. Hey, he got a Nobel for that. Good old Werner Heisenberg. Okay, great mind. Okay, so good old Dawkins continues. He says, blind faith is the absence of evidence. Again, evidence, evidence, evidence. The fact that faith is blind means that you have no particular reason to think that it is positive. I use the word blind because it is the absence of evidence. If it is in the presence of evidence, then you wouldn't call it faith. What does faith and evidence have to do? And again, he's saying that evidence is what, counteracts faith. But what is evidence if not evidence for you, meaning that it's your faith, it's your belief, it's your opinion? It means you're doing a religion when you tell me that that's your faith, that's your new belief. They convinced you, they proved to you. So the issue is he wants evidence. And of course, one of the issues that comes up is, what evidence does he have for God or for the non-existence of God? And it's like saying, what is your evidence for gravity? You can't see the mediator of gravity. You can't touch the mediator of gravity. You cannot smell it. You cannot taste it. You cannot hear it. What evidence do you want to get at the lab? You go to the lab, you run, some kind of experiment. You can't touch it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, can't hear it, can't taste it. What evidence are you going to get for the mediator of gravity? And God is the same thing. God is supposedly intangible, unseeable. You can't smell God, you can't taste God, you can't hear God. Well, some people can. So what proof do you want for an entity that is invisible, intangible, unhearable, untastable, unknown? What evidence you want? There is no evidence for an object called God. Okay? So you're asking the wrong question. The way it works in science is not, well, here's God. I've proven the existence of God through this evidence. I was able to touch him. I was able to hear him. Here's a message he sent us. No, that's not the way we do it in science. And we don't do it the other way around, saying, well, God doesn't exist because I can't hear him, I can't taste him, I can't smell him. Doesn't work either way. The way it works in science is, let us assume that God exists. God can only be an assumption, a hypothesis. Then you can explain your theory based on that hypothesis. Now you can proceed and say, look, here's my theory. I think God created the universe with his magic wand, or whatever. I don't care. The point is, God cannot be a theory. And these people are talking about believing and not believing in the theory called God. There is no such thing. That's like saying you believe in the theory called chair. I believe in the existence of the chair. And the other guy said, well, I don't believe in the existence of chairs. No. You use a chair and you say, this is a chair. Now I'm going to use it to explain how the window broke. Now you explain your theory. Then you can use the chair consistently. But to say that you don't believe in the chair or that you do believe in the chair, that's nonsense. You don't believe in objects. You don't explain objects. You explain what the object did. You explain theories. And that's the role of God. God cannot be a theory. God can only be an assumption. And these guys never figured it out because they're following the unscientific method. Okay. So here is Dawkins. He continues. He harps not only on blind faith, but he goes into truth. Oh, we have truth now. Finally, the truth. I've been waiting for the truth all these years. And the fellow asks, Dawkins says, because it's absurd, that's why it's faith. If it was evidentiary, right, you would require no faith. It would be a fact, right? And you would be missing the point of religion. And Dawkins answered, yeah, that's absolutely right, but that's not the point. That's not a point in favor of it. He says, for me, what matters is the truth. So we have to go up there and find out what the truth is. And fortunately, I got something from Mahatma Ghandi, and he said, truth is God. That's what truth is. So they ask, Dawkins says, the scientific proof, right? Like, is that what you're talking about? And he says, well, what other proof is there when we're talking about the universe, when we're talking about the nature of life? There are other sorts of truths, like moral truths, or maybe they're not truths at all. They're not scientific, but I think that if we're talking about the universe, about what reality is, about what life is, then truth means scientific truth. Again, is science about truth? Whose truth? Gandhi's truth is that truth is God? What truth are we talking about? What is this truth thingy that they're bringing into science? That's again, truth is an opinion. What is true to you is a lie to your neighbor. So all these people have the wrong scientific method. That's why they end up with atheism and with nonsense. And it's got nothing to do, again, with the existence of God. It's the procedure that they're using to make their point, to do their discussions, their dissertations. They say, oh, I'm following the scientific method. Oh, you are? What are you doing? Well, I want evidence for God. No, there is no evidence. There is no evidence for gravity, for the mediator of gravity. There is no evidence for the mediator of magnetism. You can't go to the lab and prove what what agent is doing the mediation. You can't do that. You can't do it through touch, see, or any of the senses. The only way is to visualize. And hopefully if you visualize an object. You got to say, like in the case of gravity, what physical entity came in contact with the ball or with a rock? When I let it go, why did it fall to the ground? Well, hopefully, something touched the rock. Something came in contact with a rock. And you might say, well, I didn't see anything. I didn't touch anything in there. It seems like there was nothing between the rock and the earth. Yeah, but you have to visualize. And you better visualize some physical object coming in contact with the skin of the rock. Because otherwise you're introducing black magic and saying that nothing came in contact with a rock, but it fell anyways. That's what you're saying. And the same thing with God. You can't go out there and say, well, let me prove the existence of God or the non-existence of God. No, God is an assumption. You try to visualize. Why are you visualizing? Because you're trying to understand the theory that the other guy is trying to get to you. He said, look, there was this bearded guy, magician. He moved his magic wand and he made the universe. Well, I can see what this guy's talking about. Doesn't mean I agree. Doesn't mean I believe in what he says. That's irrelevant. That's my personal version. That's my religion. But I can understand what the guy is trying to tell me. You can't do that in mathematical physics. Why? Because they have four-dimensional space-time, which you cannot visualize. They have zero-dimensional particles, which are at two places at once. So you cannot visualize what these people are saying because, you know, it's nonsense. So if traditional religion to you was nonsense, the garbage that we have now from mathematical physics is even bigger nonsense. So we went from nonsense to bigger nonsense. That's all we did, especially with mathematical physics. That's how mathematical physics developed. Okay. So these people have misconceptions, total misconceptions. And here we have another fellow. His name was Carl Sagan, for those of you who knew him. And he came up with a one-liner there that a lot of people repeat. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And he got that from Laplace. Pierre Laplace, he had his Laplace principle, as it is known. That's where he got this. He synthesized it from Laplace. It says, the weight of evidence for an extraordinary claim must be proportioned to its strangeness. The more weird it is, the more proof Laplace wanted. Okay? And you can summarize that saying, this statement is at the heart of the scientific method and a model for critical thinking, rational thought, and skepticism everywhere. Science is not about skepticism. That's not science. Skepticism or criticism is not science. Science is explanation. That's where you have to break your head. Now, that doesn't prevent you from criticizing or being skeptical about something, but skepticism, again, has to do with religion. It has to do with your opinion. If you're skeptical about something, you don't believe it, fine. That's your belief. That's your religion. It's got nothing to do with you explaining a mechanism, you explaining something that happened. Okay, so we got to remove this word skepticism from science. Skepticism is religion also. And so if you're an atheist and you're skeptical that God exists, so far you said nothing that concerns science. You're still in the unscientific world. You're in the world of religion. You're talking about your beliefs. Okay? So here is my take on all this, essentially. Science is not about skepticism. Science is about explaining. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. The purpose of evidence is to persuade. That's the only role of evidence. Science is objective. So we're not interested in your opinion. We're interested in just an explanation, an objective explanation. Physics is about objective mechanisms. Make a move of your mechanism. Put it on the screen so that people can see what mechanism you propose. And then we'll understand. We just have to watch, as far as physics is concerned, right? You watch the mechanism, you understand it, fine. You don't have to believe that that's the mechanism that really was there, that's how the thing was caused. But at least you can understand the mechanism because you see it up there on the screen. And you can't do that with mathematical physics. Because what are they going to put? They're going to put space-time. And then they have this warp fishnet. And you say, okay, I understand the fishnet. Okay, so the ball falls into the hole, and that pulls the other little ball inwards. And so what is this fishnet? Oh, we don't know. We have no way of understanding, of visualizing this. We put it in a three-dimensional projection onto two-dimensional because we cannot project four dimensions into our three-dimensional world. So you're not supposed to take it literally. And so you say, well, what prevents the Earth from flying out of the solar system? They say it's warp time. We have this warp wall of time, a depression, and the little ball called the Earth rolls around the edge of the depression. So you're saying warp time? Yeah, we don't understand it either, but you're not, see, we cannot visualize this thing because it's beyond human comprehension. We cannot understand it because the universe doesn't have to conform to the human way of looking at things. That's the kind of answers they give you. So no, these people cannot make their mechanisms visible. You cannot understand their mechanisms because they're all surrealistic. And when you question about them, they say, well, you're taking it too literally. You're thinking in classical terms, not in quantum or relativistic terms. This is where the problem is. We watch the movie and understand the mechanisms you propose. Straightforward, no big deal. Okay, once you put a mechanism on the screen, we'll understand what you're talking about. Until then, we don't know what you're talking about. Okay, summary conclusions. My summary conclusions on good old Dawkins. Dawkins believes that science is about belief. That's already a no-no. Shows he's not a scientist. He never learned the scientific method. He harps on evidence and truth, both of which have nothing to do with science. They have to do with religion, with opinion, with, his beliefs. Evidence is used to persuade. Therefore, we don't use evidence in science. Truth is an opinion. Dawkins is parroting the mathematical version of what I call the unscientific method. That's why he's an atheist. That's how he ended up being an atheist. That's why he doesn't come out of atheism. I came out of atheism because I realized that atheism deals with belief. Now, it's got nothing to do with God. It's got to do with belief. You can talk about belief in angels. You can talk about belief in space-time. It's the same thing. Science is not about belief. Science, you got the objects you point to, and they become the assumptions, especially invisible objects that do the mediations of invisible phenomena. And so you invoke them, and you say, okay, I'm going to invoke the rock. Okay, and what does the rock do? Well, I think the rock went through the window, and that's how the window broke. So now you explain the theory. Your explanation is based on the rock. And then another guy might say, well, no, it was a crowbar, or a baseball, or whatever. So everybody's got their own theory. Otherwise, he would be a scientist. So he's not a scientist. He's a religionist. Okay, and that's my conclusion on him. And here's a scientific method, and you're either on the left side or on the right side. You have to decide on which side you're going to be on. And you go to the irrational theories on the bottom right there, and you will see mathematical physics, general relativity, quantum mechanics, string theory. Why? Because they had to invent all this nonsense about warp space and particles being at two places at once. And they harp on evidence and truth, fact, knowledge. All that stuff belongs in religion. They're no different than the traditional religions, which were supernatural. And supernatural differs from irrational theories in that supernatural theories, you can imagine at least the objects. I can imagine God. I can imagine an angel. I have no problem with that. So you can understand the theory. The problem is some of the assumptions. They're a little far-fetched. But irrational theories, you cannot even imagine the assumptions. They're moving energy around. And you say, what's energy? Oh, we don't know. Oh, they're moving mass around. Oh, what is mass? Oh, we don't know. So they don't have definitions for these words, and they move them around. They treat them as physical objects. So those are irrational theories. You cannot even imagine how mass, a concept, moves a star around itself, which is what they say is a black hole. No, science is what you see on the left, okay? Causes and mechanisms in the case of physics, which is what we do primarily here, and it deals with objects. So you're either on the left or you're either on the right. And good old Dawkins, he's completely on the right.